Hey, this is Dr. Gray, and I want to interrupt this podcast because I am thrilled to announce that my book, The Premed Playbook, Guide to the Medical School Interview, is hitting bookshelves on June 6th, 2017, and I'm giving away a copy to 50 lucky winners. Also, if you pre-order a copy today from Barnes & Noble and submit your receipt to me, I will give you lifetime access to our 13-part video series on the medical school interview and 1-month access to our brand new amazing mock interview platform, starting whenever you want. That's almost $100 worth of our products for pre-ordering the paperback book from Barnes & Noble. Text the word pre-order to 44222. Again, pre-order to 44222, and I'll give you instructions on how to enter the contest and how to submit your receipt. The Premed Year, session number 228. Hello and welcome to the 2-time Academy Award-nominated podcast, The Premed Years, where we believe that collaboration, not competition, is key to your success. I'm your host, Dr. Ryan Gray, and in this podcast, we share with you stories, encouragement, and information that you need to know to help guide you on your path to becoming a physician. I'm excited to welcome Cram as the newest sponsor of the Premed Years. If you've listened to this show for a while, you may have heard the founder of Cram come on to talk about it back in episode 195. Cram helps you create the perfect study plan for you in just minutes. Keep listening to this episode, and I'll tell you a little bit more about how Cram can help you crush the MCAT, and I'll even give you a special coupon code just for you. And welcome back to the Premed Years. If this is not your first time here. If it is your first time here, welcome. Thank you for joining me here today. I have an exciting episode for you today, one that I think will help you as you go through your pre-med journey. I'm going to be talking to a student that I worked with through the application process and helped her ultimately gain an acceptance to medical school. But she struggled. She struggled with her self-doubt along the way. And we're going to talk about how that affected her and what she recommends for you to overcome that as she ultimately did. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Mariah, welcome to the Premed Years. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
When did you know you wanted to be a doctor?
You know, I provided a much more truncated version in my application process and interviews, but I've known for a while. I think I've known I wanted to be in the healthcare realm since I was a kid. I kind of watched my grandmother, who was a registered nurse, care for my grandmother and myself. I had asthma really bad when I was younger. But overall, in my family, we had a number of healthcare professionals, nurses and phlebotomists and things like that. So I was kind of always interested. And then when I was younger, I actually thought women couldn't be doctors for a while.
Why?
And because all of the nurses I knew were women and all of the doctors I knew were men. And it was just kind of the default. That's what I saw growing up, and just never imagined, never for, at least the first several years of my life, imagined that women could be. And actually, one day I was at a follow-up doctor's visit with my grandmother, and a woman walked in and she started asking us all these questions, which we had already answered when, the nurse had been in before. And I kind of interrupted. I've always, I guess, been somewhat precocious or curious, or I would ask questions whenever they struck me. And so I kind of interrupted and was like, we already answered these questions. When is the doctor coming in? And she and my grandmother just started laughing hysterically. And she was just like, I am the doctor. And of course I felt foolish, but also I was like, oh my goodness, like I've never, ever, and I had a lot of doctors. I had asthma and allergies and eczema really bad. So I'd been to pulmonologists and allergists and dermatologists and everything. And it was a surprise to me.
And how old were you at that point?
I mean, I was probably like maybe 7 or 8, something
and
like that.
Where did you grow up?
At this time, I was in Kansas. Actually, I was in Wichita, Kansas.
Okay.
And but I grew up in Kansas and then in Oklahoma. I moved to Oklahoma when I was around 10. And that's where I graduated from high school from, was in Northeast Oklahoma. But my father still lives in Kansas, and I've got a bunch of aunts and uncles and cousins that are there. So
Yeah.
I'm back in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas as well. My mother lives in Texas, so I'm in the area at least once a year in all of those states.
Yeah. So you grow up with bad allergies and asthma, and your grandmother's a nurse, and you have all of these female, I don't know if you'd call them role models at this point, that you see as phlebotomists and nurses. Why were you not interested in becoming a nurse?
Well, I was initially, I mean, again, because that's who I saw. But I think for me, I kind of like the idea of the physician as kind of the team leader and someone who's able to be in a position to make to be the decision maker and to determine courses of treatment. It's just something that always appealed to me. And after I graduated, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but after graduating undergrad and having spent a great part of my career so far working with physicians, I just see so much that they're able to do as it relates to, working within public health and kind of being that clinician who practices, but is also able to be a real expert and is seen as an expert on policy issues as well. From implementation of the Affordable Care Act, which, will, I guess, remain intact in some ways, but all the way down to just, physicians who would come to the Hill and testify on any range of issues, physicians that would come to the office when I was on Capitol Hill. And just the expertise that they had was just always appealing to me. I like to know a whole lot and to be able to act on it. And I've just seen that as a way to be able to do that.
That sort of knowledge comes, I would assume, later in life as you learn more about healthcare and the different roles that people take. When you're younger and you were looking at this, how did you decide that healthcare was even a path for you?
I think it just, in general, I just assumed it was in some ways because so many people within my family were engaged as healthcare professionals in some way or some fashion or another. But when I kind of knew that I could, or I thought I could do it, that I would actually be successful, was probably around middle school. And I don't know how it works at a lot of places, but in my middle school, they started you at around 7th grade, kind of doing the honors types of math classes and science classes, where you really were just, like as a 7th grader, I took the 8th grade math and science classes. And I think that was kind of the first time, that it seems like, and they also had, career programs and things like that, where they bring speakers in and they'd have you take some of the aptitude tests that kind of told you what you might be good at and things like that. And so I think from just like a very, can I do it? Is this something viable for me? It was probably middle school and kind of getting tracked into some of the honors math and science courses.
How did you start exploring, once you learned aptitude-wise that you like the classes, what questions did you start asking yourself, or who did you start asking questions to figure out what your role could be in healthcare and getting that exposure to things?
So in middle school, just in terms of starting to try to just figure it out, it was probably a teacher who I actually still consider a mentor, Jeannie Owens, who at the time was a teacher at my middle school 7th and 8th grade center, and actually just retired from teaching. And it was through this 21st Century's program. It's a federal grantee program. She established this You Go Girl. It's kind of like, it was like an after school mentoring type program. And this was kind of where it was with a group of middle school girls, and it was designed to kind of help to transition you from middle school into high school, and kind of how you can, providing skills to be able to work with the different pressures, which include, sometimes at this age, a lot of young girls will start to kind of hide their intelligence, and will kind of demure more. And especially in an area like where we grew up, where there was often really defined gender roles. And so kind of through that program is where I kind of started to explore a little bit, and expressed interest, and first kind of had that, from a mentor perspective, support, I think, and encouragement to pursue medicine. And one of the things that we did was kind of research, if I'm interested in this, how can you, what do you need to do to get there? So we had some girls who were interested in law school, who have actually gone on to law school and have graduated and are lawyers now. For me, it was medicine. And so it really just started with kind of that support, that guidance to kind of start exploring. And then I just kind of went online. I remember in one of my math books, there was like this chart that said, if you want to be a physician, this is how many years it takes. And it was like 12 years at least. But then kind of expanded that, looking online at just how do you become a physician, and part of it was also looking at like study skills, which was another 21st century program that I worked with when I was in middle school. And so that's kind of where I started to first ask the questions. When I got into high school, though, there were like the pre-health society type programs. It wasn't pre-med at that point. Usually that's college, but we had pre-health professional, like social groups, school clubs. And so I participated in that. And in that club, I actually ended up shadowing a cardiologist we had like a shadow day where they arranged for students to go to one of the hospitals in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, and to shadow physicians. So I got to spend an entire day like in the cardiac cath lab with a cardiologist. And that's where I learned that if you want to be, hyper specialized, it takes even more than 12 years. And then you have to do things like fellowships and the like. And so, but I still, so that gave me kind of like an overall idea. But I don't know, I guess that's kind of where I kind of started to ask questions and started to really get an idea of what all it would take. I was always interested again in kind of science and math. And so I knew that, when I got to college, that's what I was going to major in. But yeah, I kind of started asking those questions as early as middle school. That's also when I knew that I was going to try to go outside of the state for college. It was a decision I made in like 8th grade.
Through that time, learning about all of this stuff, you're an African-American female growing up in the Midwest, and you talked about these gender assignments already, gender roles. Did you ever face any negativity or doubt from other people on your journey that questioned your ability, number one, and number two, your place to be a physician in this world?
I think that the short answer is yes. But it can be kind of insidious, I would get questions like, are you sure that's what you want to do? And what about having kids? And, men don't like it too much when their wives make more money than them, so it was less, I had experiences with teachers, broadly who, from time to time I could tell, didn't think I I don't know if they didn't think that I had the aptitude or whether they just weren't going to take the time to kind of nurture it. So I can definitely think of a few teachers along the way where it just seems like I was just always on their bad side. It was never quite clear to me why. But in terms of kind of directly discouraging me or questioning my aptitude, not so much directly, but there were definitely voices who tried to, instill in me fear that I wouldn't basically be able to have it all as a woman, which is still something that is debated even amongst medical students, residents, et cetera. But there was a lot of that,
Yeah.
Even my grandmother, who completely supports my decision to go to medical school, and she's very, very excited. But I remember a few years ago when I was telling her that, after I had graduated and I was working, but that I was still interested in going to medical school, she tried to steer me towards being a nurse anesthetist because, again, pointing towards the fact that, I was married, or I was like engaged at the time, and, she wants me to give her some great grandbabies. So, and she thought that would be a quicker way for me to actually be able to practice in a relatively lower stress environment and things like that.
So you have this decision to go to be a physician, and it sounds like you surrounded yourself well when you were younger. You started undergrad. Did you, starting undergrad, you were dead set on being a physician and you did the whole pre-med route?
I was pretty set on being a physician, and I did do the pre-med route. So I majored in biology and minored in chemistry. I took all the prereqs for med school. And, I did pretty well in most of my classes and graduated with honors and everything. And I was always interested in medicine. And that was my primary goal in going to, when I was in college. But I got a couple of C's. And there was a saying on my campus, I'm sure that it was true on others, but this was also kind of the advice that we got from our pre-professional offices, which is that, C's get degrees, but not MDs. And so I was, after my, second semester sophomore year, so between sophomore and junior year, that's when I was really discouraged, and that's where the questioning of my aptitude kind of came into play, and the discouragement that I essentially had ruined my academic chances of being accepted to medical school.
Why did you struggle? Why do you think you struggled?
I honestly think it was, for me at that point, time management. So I had, to give context, so my first semester freshman year, I got 2 C's. I earned 2 C's, and one was in general chemistry and the other was in calculus 2. Probably shouldn't have taken the calculus 2 class, but that's another conversation. But I took, I think it was 17 credits that semester. I was also in the marching band, which was an incredible commitment. And I just think I kind of jumped into the deep end and I just didn't quite know what I was getting myself into. And then the second C came second semester of my sophomore year, and that was in microbiology. So that was, an upper level bio class, considered an upper level bio class. And that is pretty much when it was kind of suggested that med school probably wouldn't be an option. But I think it really boiled down to time management on my part, and not prioritizing the way that I should have, as I think a lot of undergrads sometimes do.
It's a common mistake that I see pre-meds make, is they try to take on too much too soon. Mm-hmm. Do you think there was a learning curve there for you to learn how to be a undergraduate student, a college student versus a high school student? Or do you think there was just too much on your plate with the classes that you were taking and being in the marching band?
I think there was probably a bit of a learning curve, one that I hope, I know that there will be transitioning to medical school too, just in terms of, when I was in high school, and to an extent in college, but especially in high school, like I didn't have to do a great deal of studying. When I was in high school, the reason I hesitated a little bit when you asked about if I knew med school was absolutely what I wanted to do. When I was in high school, I also participated in like speech and debate. I was in mock Congress, as well as mock trial and band. So I was in a lot that was in addition to kind of the AP, pre-calc and calculus and chemistry and bio that I did. So I always had like varied interests that I kind of always pursued. And so when I got to college, I think, certainly I had to learn how to study a little bit differently to actually study intentionally. But I think I also thought that having so much on my plate, I had juggled it all when I was in high school. I could juggle it all when I was in college. And I was definitely mistaken, particularly that first semester. And again, when I was the sophomore, that second semester. So I think it was a little bit of a combination of both, but I think that it was, I think I just kind of shot myself in the foot there a little bit with taking on so much that first semester, thinking that, I could approach it the same as when I was in high school.
You said you got another C your sophomore year, and that's where the discussions came up that maybe medicine wasn't right for you. Were these discussions that you were having with yourself or with an advisor?
With my advisor, I think I had like maybe one meeting with the advisor, and that was the advice that I received. But when I spoke to my peers, they had all received pretty much the same advice. And actually, I know a lot of people who, to this day, have not tried to actually fully pursue medicine or dental school because of the same advice. So it wasn't all in my head. And then the people that I knew that did, follow through, they, for the most part, were, straight A's, maybe a couple of B's. And so it seems like that was being confirmed for me in what I saw around me.
Yeah, it's hard. It perpetuates this stereotype, especially when you see your peers, the ones that are getting the straight A's and doing well in classes, getting into medical school, and your advisors are saying, oh, you got a C or you got 2 C's, maybe you shouldn't be applying. It perpetuates this idea that you have to be a perfect student to be a physician, and it's the wrong message that we're sending to students, I think.
I agree, and I know that now, but I didn't know that then, and everywhere that I went, or where I sought information out, it perpetuated that exact same myth.
So you obviously gave up on the dream for a while. You graduated. You've been working in the healthcare world, but more from a political standpoint. What have you been doing these last several years?
So after I graduated, I started this program that was a joint program between my alma mater, Howard University, and Kaiser Family Foundation. And it was called the Barbara Jordan Health Policy Scholars Program. And through this program, I served as a health policy scholar in a member of Congress's office, who was actually the first physician elected to first African-American physician elected to Congress, who was also a woman. And so I spent the summer there, working with her on the Energy and Commerce Health Subcommittee, which was kind of the primary committee that was responsible at that point for overseeing the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. This was just a few months after ACA had passed back in 2010. And from there, I went to another member of Congress's office, another personal member office is what they call them. And I started as a staff assistant, but then kind of rose in the ranks as a legislative staffer. And excuse me, in that office, I worked on health policy broadly, but I had a real interest. The member had a real interest, and so I was able to pursue my interest in health disparities, so policies and public, and really advocating for funding for public health programs that serve to address health disparities. So within African Americans, Native American and American Indians, Asian American and Pacific Islanders, or and Hispanic Latinos were all huge focuses for us. And so I worked there. I staffed her, or kind of led her portfolio for the Labor, Health, and Human Services Subcommittee on the House Appropriations Committee, and also her work on the Budget Committee. And so that kind of really opened my eyes to how, one, on the authorizing side, how laws are passed, and how they're debated, the process by which different things are attached to pieces of legislation that are ultimately passed or failed, and why they may pass, why they may fail. But also on the appropriation side and the budgeting side, being able to look at how funding decisions are actually made, but also actually being able to kind of influence them as well. And because she was on the Labor HHS subcommittee, we really got to weigh in pretty forcefully on how federal dollars were directed to the federal government. And so I did that for 4 years. And from there, went to a nonprofit public health organization, which is where I am now. And we work with the HIV and AIDS directors at state and territorial health departments. We're actually going to be expanding here pretty soon to also work with CDC-funded local jurisdictions as well. And then we also work with the viral hepatitis prevention coordinators at also state health departments. Mm. And within that position, I'm on the policy and legislative affairs and the hepatitis teams. And so we work to provide technical assistance on implementing grants from the CDC that are specific to hepatitis prevention. And we facilitate that in a number of different ways, from peer-to-peer technical assistance, where we identify a state that another state might benefit from having kind of a mentorship type of relationship with. But we also provide direct technical assistance in terms of identifying opportunities either via funding or opportunities to leverage programming within health departments or within other governmental agencies to be able to basically implement policies and programming that will help prevent hepatitis, but also serve the communities that are most disproportionately impacted by hepatitis. And so within this, I'm able to, one, pursue the appropriations work. I continue that work in terms of advocating for funding for the Division of Viral Hepatitis at CDC. But I also get the opportunity to really continue to work on health disparities, which are pretty rife within hepatitis. So it's exciting work. It can be very frustrating though, because, as I think your listeners will appreciate, we're in really historic times as far as how our government is currently structured and is functioning, or perhaps not functioning. Yeah. And so it makes, one, the advocacy that much more important, but again, frustrating, because, the system, the process has to work, in order to be able to direct funding where it needs to go. And, we've really the last several years been in a system where we're kind of barreling from shutdown to shutdown, or operating on continuing resolutions, which doesn't allow Congress to really take a look at individual programs and determine what we should continue funding and what we should no longer fund, and to really be intentional about how we're appropriating money across the federal government overall. And that has a real impact on people on the ground, especially when you're talking about labor programs, education programs, which all ultimately impact the whole health of an individual.
Again, I want to thank Cram Fighter for sponsoring this episode. First, let me tell you what Cram Fighter isn't. They are not an MCAT test prep company. I don't want you to think that just because you're already using Next Step Test Prep or Kaplan or any of the other MCAT test prep companies out there that you don't need CramFighter. Quite the contrary. CramFighter works with these other test prep companies to help you create the perfect study plan for you. Even if you're studying on your own and you have all of the books, CramFighter will help you create a plan. You log into the website, you tell CramFighter what materials you're using, the test date that you're taking the test, when you're starting to study, and vacations that you need to take, and how much time you have, and it will create a custom schedule for you. There is a special offer just for you. Visit cramfighter.com to subscribe for 25% off any regular priced plan from right now until May 7th, 2017. Use the code PREMED25. That's all capital letters, PREMED25. You're having this huge impact on people and helping people, right? The two main reasons people want to go into medicine, they love science and love helping people. You're out there, sounds like, really liking what you're doing, and you're having an impact on people. There's somebody listening right now that had a very similar path, I'm sure, of going to undergrad, wanting to be a doctor, getting those couple C's and being told they can't do it. But they're out there enjoying their career like you are. What eventually led you to start thinking that you wanted to give medicine another shot?
So the very specific instance that led me to actually go back and register to take the MCAT and give it another go was actually a site visit that I did in San Francisco. I was there for the annual liver meeting, which is this big conference where the liver docs come in. And we did a site visit at the Tom Waddell Urban Health Clinic, which is kind of managed by the San Francisco Department of Public Health. And we had the opportunity to go and see where a physician who was actively treating, a primary care physician who was treating people living with hepatitis who actually were also co-infected with HIV. So these and had diabetes and other comorbidities. So these were pretty complex cases that and they were unstably housed or homeless. And so there were, they were very complex cases. And so while we were visiting, the physician kind of gave us a tour of the facility and everything, and we got to see just the awesome work that they were doing there. But also we had the opportunity to meet with two of the patients that she had treated. And, she was really talking about how, her job as a physician, how she went through the screening process, how she really worked with them day to day and week to week to really get them to a place where they were ready for treatment. And I'm kind of really paraphrasing here because with hepatitis, there are a lot of barriers to treatment access. And so she worked with them for a while to get them to a place where they were ready for treatment and to a place where the state Medicaid would actually pay for treatment. And once they were treated, they just talked about how it provided motivation to get their HIV viral loads maintained and eventually suppressed, and how before there was no motivation to treat like their diabetes, but once they had success on the hepatitis medications, they were really motivated to just really be able to improve, do what they could individually to really improve these other health issues that they had. And I think it was kind of one of those times where I saw just up close and personal, right in a health clinic, all of these things that I was interested in, all the reasons why I'd wanted to go to medical school in the first place, all of the policies I've been advocating for on a federal level really come into sharp focus. And I just left so motivated. And while I do enjoy the work that I do, I've always wanted to treat patients. It's something that really never left my mind. But again, I just thought it was something that was just not possible for me. And so, but after my experience during that side visit, it was just all I could think about. And when I got back to DC, I think within like a week or so, I had registered for the MCAT, and then I started looking for support for people who had been in a similar situation that I was in, and eventually happened upon the podcast and premeds.org.
Why register for the MCAT as your first step? Why not go back to your advisors at school or seek out new advisors and say, hey, am I crazy for doing this? Or what do I need to do? Why the MCAT first?
Well, one, I didn't want to be discouraged anymore. And, that was, and I had reached, I had some conversations with the professional office at my alma mater after graduating. And again, just didn't quite feel like I was getting good guidance. But that had been a few years had passed before a couple of years anyway. I think about a little more than 2 years had passed before I had the side visit and then went ahead and registered. So I didn't want to be discouraged. And I also wanted to put my feet to the fire and really hold myself accountable. Now, that probably isn't the best way to do it, to just go ahead and just throw money at a test and hope things work out. But I just didn't want an out. I didn't want another out. I knew this is what I wanted to do. And I had the prereqs. And I had a strong GPA from undergrad. And so most of what I had read about postbacks and S&Ps seemed to be for people who needed grade repair. And ultimately, there wasn't any really replacing that microbiology grade. And aside from that, my science GPA and cumulative GPA were pretty solid. So
I liked that thought of not wanting another out. And I've talked about it on this podcast. Don't have a plan B. And so as soon as you came back and you clicked on register and spent your couple $100 for the MCAT, you said, I don't have a plan B. This is what I want to do. What did it feel like to do that?
Oh, it was nerve-wracking. I was, although I guess the last, year and a half for me has been pretty nerve-wracking, but I was incredibly nervous. And, my husband knew that I wanted to go to medical school. He's always known that was the goal. We met my freshman year in college. We've been friends for, 11 years now. And so he knew that was always my goal, but I didn't even tell him. I was, it was very much one of those things where I was nervous and I was anxious and I was afraid of failing, and I wasn't sure if I wanted anyone to know if I did fail. And so those were kind of all of the thoughts that were going through my head, that I really wanted to do this. I wanted to follow through and hold myself accountable, but I was also terrified of failing.
What was the toughest part of going through this process as a non-traditional student, somebody working full-time and figuring out what you needed to do to apply and pulling your applications together? What was the hardest thing, do you think?
So probably, from a mental perspective, I think it was just hard to maintain confidence because, having been discouraged and having been in a state of discouragement for so long, mentally there were a number of nights where I just did not think it was going to be possible for me. But also the time, being able to, I want to say time management, but also there are only 24 hours in a day. And I work in a job where it's a pretty good work-life balance. I don't have too many complaints there, but it can be demanding. I travel for my job at times, and I have to prepare for conferences and presentations in addition to just the day-to-day work. And so I was spread pretty thin. And so just actually having being alert, being able, trying to be alert and stay awake enough hours to actually study for the MCAT was really, really difficult. Trying to study when I was on planes or in a hotel room and things like that were proved difficult at times.
What led to your success on the MCAT, or maybe a perceived failure on your part if you didn't get the score you wanted?
So I did not get the score that I wanted. But I think, if I had to do it over again, the one thing I would do differently is I would probably try to have a conversation with my husband about quitting my job. And ultimately, I probably would have quit my job and just dedicated full-time study to the MCAT. Like if I would have reached the end of this cycle and had been unsuccessful, I was leaving my job and I had already had a conversation with my supervisor. Now I'm in a very supportive environment that understood that this was what my career goal was. And so I was able to have, I think, a little bit more of a frank conversation than perhaps some people may be able to have. But I had made up in my mind that I was no longer going to work full time and that I was going to dedicate all of my time, outside of my protected time with my husband, all of my other time was going to be towards getting into medical school. So that's the thing that I would have done differently. I think that really, I think that it impacted my grade. And again, I enjoy what I do, but it can be demanding at times. So that's one thing that I would have done differently. I think, was a huge impact was just not having enough hours in the day. And a lot of the studying that I did, I was doing it when I was exhausted after just at least an 8-hour day at work. And then, a 45-minute to an hour commute home, each way. And so I think that's what that's what contributed to, that's what I think contributed to my perhaps not doing as well as I wanted. And I would definitely would have done that differently if I would have had to retake the MCAT and go through this process again.
It sounds like a recurring theme from the start of your undergrad with time management issues and your applications and MCAT prep with time management issues. And I wouldn't say maybe time management, but just commitment issues or commitment overextending yourself maybe. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I've perhaps been told that once or twice, that I have a tendency to stretch myself thin. When I first started working with you, I was also, so I've focused a lot on work, on the work aspects, but I was also an officer in my sorority on both our local level and our state level. Mm-hmm. And I was engaged in our regional conferences, and I would, do occasional trainings on social action and things like that. I was very involved. I was also part of our undergraduate advisory committee. And so, and a couple other things as well. And so, that's one of the first things you told me to do was something has to give. And so I took a huge step back from my sorority and hey, it's still there. And now that I'm kind of past this process, I'm starting to re-engage in things. And, at least I'm not on any leadership positions, but if I've got, a little bit of time here or there. But yeah, I tend to, I think, bite off a little bit more than I can chew. And it's tough because, even as I'm saying this, I was still ultimately successful in my med school application, and I've gotten an acceptance at a school I'm pretty excited about. But and I think I've learned my lesson. I'm planning to devote myself fully to studying come the fall. But yeah, I tend to try to multitask probably a whole lot more than I should. And I've read that, humans can't actually truly multitask anyway.
It's called task switching, not multitasking.
Exactly. So something ends up falling through the cracks eventually.
You mentioned that you have an acceptance to medical school. What do you think led to having a successful application and interview and your ability to tell the story that you wanted, being a non-traditional student and talking about the struggles with your MCAT and early classes with those few C's, even though your GPA ended up okay?
I first of all, I have a lot of stories that I wanted to tell, and I tried to cram them all into my personal statement, which didn't work. And so honestly, working with you and really crafting, what were some of the highlights, and really trying to just hit on those highlights to tell the story of really how I had come to the decision and why medicine was so important to me. In the course of my actual interview, my grades did not come up a single time, nor did my MCAT. And so I actually had 2 interviews with 3 interviewers. The first was actually with the chair of the admissions committee. So I was incredibly nervous during that, but he was more interested in kind of like those generic why medicine types of questions. How did you come to this decision? What type of physician do you want to be? Which I kind of bungled, but I guess it worked out. And he wanted to know kind of what I was currently working on and what I'd be working on over the next, several months. But then that second interview, all they were interested in was exactly what my story was, what, the work that I had done working on policy, working in Congress, what were my thoughts on the ACA and ACA repeal? What were my thoughts on the debate around drug pricing? And, should the federal government come in and regulate the prices of drugs? And, what about the scientists and the pharmaceutical companies that have invested so much time and money into, R&D and the like? And so I think once I actually got in front of the people who would be making the admissions decisions, I was, they weren't, I guess my numbers passed muster enough for them to invite me. And once I was there, they were just really interested in me. And you had told me that was going to be the case, but, that really was the case. And so because I had, I had crafted the story and spent so much time, really getting comfortable talking about myself. It's always been pretty easy for me to advocate for others and to kind of do my job in advocacy, but the advocating for myself part, it took a lot of work and practice for me. But once I got there, that's what they were interested in. And so I just focused on that. And it was interesting because one of my interviewers was actually, he does pharmacology and so there was definitely, we got into, it wasn't a debate, but it was an interesting conversation around, the altruism of wanting to make sure that people have access to drugs versus, what I would say the profit motive. But I was, and I applied to a lot of schools and I was rejected from a whole lot of schools. So, I'm sure that there are schools that really cared a lot about, my very average MCAT, and the fact that I finished my prereqs like almost 10 years prior. But ultimately I didn't apply to any school that I wouldn't have been excited to go to, based on what I knew about the school. And I think that I ended up, really at a place that values my experiences and what I have to bring to the incoming class. And I feel like I really knew that would be the case if I was accepted based on the interview and the questions that they asked me. They seemed really interested in me and my story.
They seemed really interested in you, and yet you lost a lot of confidence going through the process, waiting. Talk about what it was like to leave that interview and then wait for any word from them?
So this is the second hardest part that I never would want to revisit in the application process, was that wait. And I have a reputation amongst my friends and acquaintances of being fairly cerebral. So is the term one of my friends used. I can get in my head a lot. I think and I overthink. That was probably also an issue for me on the MCAT. But I tend to really, really overthink things. And so when I left, I think I sent you an email where I said, I'm pretty confident. There were a couple of things I kind of wasn't so sure about, but I'm pretty confident. But then the more that I just thought, like I just rehashed both of the interviews in my head over and over again. And I was like, no way they're going to take me. To give you an idea, one of the questions that the chair of the admissions committee asked me was, again, what type of physician do you want to be? And I said, primary care physician. And he was like, yes, but I mean, family medicine or, do you want to work with do you want to work with kids? And I was like, not the one that works with kids, not the one that works with kids. And then it was like internal medicine. And I was like, that's it. And again, I was super nervous, but I just remember thinking, oh, he thinks I'm a complete idiot. And I couldn't even articulate, which specialty I was interested in. No way would he then advocate on the committee for my acceptance. And, what ended up making me feel even less confident was the way that my school does it is, after the interviews, they rank everyone. And so if you kind of fall within your score at the very, very top of the list, where they can pretty much make a pretty solid assumption that after everyone is ranked, you would still be accepted, they go ahead and accept you. So they say that's usually only a few people. And then they reject the people who are at like the very lowest end of the ranking. And then everyone else gets their decision essentially deferred, or they're on hold until March. And so once January hit, which is when they told us we could expect, at least those preliminary letters. And I got that letter and I opened it and they said that my decision was on hold until March. I just knew for sure at that point. I was like, well, at least it's not a rejection. We had lots of, at least it's not a rejection. But it just really felt like it was inevitable. And the further away I got from the interview and the more, rejection from other schools that I received, and the more that I just rehashed the interviews over and over and over again. There was one question I kept harping on from the interviewer who also was in the pharmacology department, where he asked me about the science of the new drugs that are coming out to address the hepatitis C virus. And I gave him a pretty good answer. I think now I know, I think my answers were pretty good. But at the time when I was kind of in this window of waiting to see, I was like, oh, I probably didn't answer that right. I talked about the genotyping, but I really should have talked about like how the drug actually attacks the virus. Like, why do they call it a direct acting antiviral? And so like all of these things were, the more that I rehashed the interviews in my head, the less confident I became. Yeah. And so that was, and in fact, I think like a couple of weeks, maybe a month or so before I ended up getting the acceptance, I even emailed you and was like, there's no way I'm getting accepted. I'm going to have to like apply to postbacks and or maybe I'll get a master's and I'm going to have to go through this whole process again. And I'm going to have to retake the MCAT. And you were just like, you have to just slow down, breathe. It's not over yet. And, which was really helpful.
So you're going to have, I'll give you some med student advice. Mm-hmm. With the type of person you are, and for you listening to this, if you are the same type of person, med school is going to destroy you, because you're going to come out of every test and you're going to go through every question in your head and be like, oh, I did that one wrong. I did that one wrong. I did that one wrong. I'm so dumb. I'm so stupid. Why am I here? I can't do this. And then you're going to get your score back and get like a 95. So that's typically it seems like the majority of students are like that make it to this point and get into medical school, that we love to question everything and doubt everything, but you just have to trust yourself at the end of the day.
Yeah. and I'll say this. I'm a very anxious person, and just in general, my grandmother has called me worrisome since I was like 12. It is definitely my personality, but I will, and this may be sharing too much, but collaboration, right? I actually intend to like work with the counseling office, honestly, pretty much to connect with them as soon as I get to campus, because I know that I can lose myself in my head sometimes just with the doubt and second guessing and things like that. And so I've already just kind of tried to make some plans in terms of just how I'll be able to cope with myself and, my own self-doubt. And so, I've like connected to people who are currently on campus and things like that, just to make sure that I am connected to some support services that will, help me manage. And so I do agree that is, I don't want to lose myself to my anxiety and all of my second guessing, but I tend to be very, very, very cerebral.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good to know yourself and know the help that you need and be okay seeking out that help. So that's good. Mm-hmm. So, Mariah, as we wrap up here, what words of wisdom do you have for the student listening that is doubting their self on their journey, getting feedback from their advisor that they shouldn't be going to med school because of their grades in certain classes? What would you tell the student listening?
I would say, if you know that this is what you want to do, and medicine is what you wake up in the morning thinking about and it's constantly on your mind. I know it was for me, even in the 7 years between when I graduated and now, I thought about medicine constantly. If this is what you want to do, don't allow anyone to discourage you. Just make a commitment and really put your best foot forward and pursue it. And I would also say really examine, particularly for the non-traditional student who may have a whole lot on your plate, really take a step back and just look at what commitments you have and ask yourself the question that you asked me, Dr. Gray, which is, how is this contributing to you getting into medical school? What story, how can you talk about this experience in a way that you can connect it back to your ultimate goal of getting into medical school? And then I would focus on ensuring that those are the things that you're pursuing, particularly if you're very tight on time, as I was and tend to be. It's a huge commitment monetarily, but also as far as time is concerned. And if you can knock it out, in one go, then I think that would be a good goal to have.
All right, there you have it. Again, that was Mariah sharing her story of ultimate success, gaining acceptance to medical school after many years of working outside of the pre-med world, obviously going and working in Washington, D.C., working on the Hill, giving people that didn't have a voice, lobbying and doing all of that advocacy work, and ultimately realizing that becoming a physician was her ultimate goal. And now she has that opportunity with an acceptance. I want to thank a few people that have left us ratings and reviews. First one, Josie12er says, must listen to. You just have to listen to all of them, starting from the first one. Thank you for that review. We have another one here from Bersher King, that says, truly informative and helpful podcast. I'm a non-traditional student in every possible way, and this podcast has helped so much in putting to rest some of my fears and concerns. I really enjoy the podcast on DO versus MD and the stories of people who have gone a non-traditional route. Awesome. Thank you for that review. If you would like to leave us a review, you can do so at medicalschoolhq.net/iTunes. Again, medicalschoolhq.net/iTunes. If you have any suggestions for podcast ideas or topics, shoot me an email, ryan@medicalschoolhq.net. I hope you had a great week. I want to thank Cram Fighter again for sponsoring. Use the code PREMED25, save 25% off on Cram Fighter's services now through May 7th. Again, PREMED25, all capital letters. Have a great week. We'll see you next week here at the Premed Years.